Help yourself to a sandwich, Tech.
No thanks, Dave. I've already had my lunch.
I'll take that extra sandwich, Dave. You owe me something for figuring out that water splash problem this morning.
Just listen to who's talking. Look, Mike, who told you about the metal splash shield? And who was it?
All right, me boys. How about bringing us all up to date?
Well, Tech, it was Dave's job to begin with. Mike just butted in, and I butted in right after. Dave was saying...
And the customer claims that every now and then the engine misses when he drives too fast through a puddle of water.
He must be one of those water jockeys. You know, some drivers seem to get a bang out of tearing through water like they're running a speedboat. Then they holler if the engine conks out.
Yeah, I know, Mike. But how do you cure a case like that? Give the guy driving lessons?
Beats me, Dave. Let's ask Joe about it.
What's up, Mike?
This job Dave's got sometimes coughs and sputters when the car goes too fast through water puddles. Got any bright ideas?
Let me see. Why, all this car needs is a couple of metal splash shields. You guys must be blind.
Wait a minute, Joe. I don't get it.
Well, I'm talking about the metal splash shields on the P-20. They go on the frame and keep road splash away from the engine.
I still don't follow you, Joe.
Oh, now look. When a car goes fast through water, the splash can hit the front body brackets. Let's raise the car so you can see. Now, here's the bracket, I mean. If the water hits here hard enough, it can splash up and smack the front toe boards. Because of the toe board angle, water sometimes bounces onto the coil, distributor, and spark plugs. This can short out the ignition.
Sounds like a two-cushion water shot to me.
Yeah. And some people plow through water fast enough to force some of it through the pedal openings in the toe board, wetting the floor mat. What's more, water splash might collect in the rubber seals around the clutch and brake pedals. Then when the driver suddenly takes his foot off one of these pedals, water squirts into the front passenger compartment.
And what would you do about that, Joe?
Why, I'd use a heated ice pick and burn drain holes in the bottom of both rubber seals.
Okay, Joe. Now, if I get the metal shields out of stock, will you show me how to put them on?
Sure, Dave. Meantime, I'll get a drill. Now, if you use this shield as a template, you'll drill the holes in the right places. Then you use self-tapping screws to fasten the shields on both sides of the car. Drill 3 holes on each side, 2 in the frame side rail, just ahead of the front body bracket, and 1 hole at the bottom of the bracket. Incidentally, some of the older cars have rubber composition shields attached to the fender inner panels. Sometimes these shields get forced out of place or damaged by stones. If I find any like that, I install the metal shield.
Okay, Joe. I'll finish up the other side.
Well, that was nice going, fellas. Of course, you won't run into a job like that every day, but it's a good one to know about. Now, have you guys come across any cases of water getting into the trunk of a P-19 two-door sedan?
Well, Tech, I had only one case. Water was running down the fender and leaking into the trunk from the top side of the taillight opening, right where it overlaps the body panel.
How'd you handle it, Mike?
Nothing to it, Tech. I just used a heavy sealing putty that can be painted over. I packed it around the edges of the taillight opening from inside the luggage compartment.
I don't know of a better way, Mike. Now, any more good ideas?
This may be a little off the subject, Tech, but there's one point I think the fellas ought to watch.
What's that, my boy?
Front wheel bearing lubrication, Tech. For instance, I had a loose wheel bearing on a job the other day, so I pulled the wheel to check the bearing. Joe was with me at the time. This bearing was a little loose, Joe. But look, there isn't enough lubricant in here anyway.
Maybe it leaked out.
Well, the dust seal is in good shape, and the cap on the end of the hub was on good and tight. Nope, I'm sure the lubricant didn't leak out. Besides, there are no signs of grease on the brake lining.
So what? There was no harm done, was there?
No, we're lucky we caught this before the bearings were damaged. All we have to do is pack and adjust them, and they'll be okay. You know, if wheel bearings aren't properly lubricated, they're apt to get hot, because the lubricant also acts as a coolant. There's quite a load on these bearings, Joe. As a matter of fact, wheel bearings get an extra load when turning corners and when rolling at high rotating speeds. When a car turns a corner, there's a sharp thrust load on the bearing in the outside wheel. Besides this, High speed creates heat in the bearings, but they won't get too hot if the bearings are properly lubricated. So, if there isn't enough lubricant in the bearings, the heat plus the loads will cause bearing failure.
Right you are, Dave. Proper lubrication is mighty important. In fact, checking front wheel bearings for adjustment and lubrication on all new cars is as important as any of the other lubrication points.
And how, Tech? We always check them in this shop. Besides that, our service manager sells customers on a front wheel bearing inspection every 10,000 miles as a safety measure.
Speaking of wheel bearing inspection, Dave, just how do you go about it?
Why, I pull the front wheels to begin with, Tech, and then I clean the bearings. After that, I inspect them to see if they're in good shape. If they're okay, I repack them.
Yeah, Dave, but when you clean those bearings, make sure the cleaning solution is clean. You'll do more harm than good if you get dirt in the bearings.
Right, Tech. And getting back to packing the bearings, I put a gob of short fiber wheel bearing lubricant about the size of a pack of cigarettes inside the hub. That keeps the lubricant from working out of the bearing. And I use a bearing packer to force the new lubricant around each roller.
Using a packer is a lot better than doing the job by hand. And it's smart to put in a new dust seal whenever you take an old one out. Now, Joe, how do you adjust the wheel bearings?
I tighten the nut until the bearing starts to bind while the wheel is spinning. Then, I back it off the distance of one castle, and then to the nearest cotter pin slot so I can lock it in place with a new cotter pin. After that, I spin the wheel again to be sure it's free, and try to shake it to see if there's any looseness in the bearing.
Attaboy, Joe. And remember, front wheel bearings should always be inspected for proper lubrication and adjustment before a new car is delivered to its owner, and again at the 1,000-mile inspection. Now, let's turn the record over and talk about some other special service tips. Dave, you, Mike, and Joe have pointed out some unusual service tips really worth passing on to a lot of mechanics.
There are a few more tips where those came from, Tech.
Like what, for instance?
Well, Mike ran into a strange rattle up front. He knew it was under the hood somewhere, but that was all. Tell him about it, Mike.
Sure, Dave. That noise was a stickler, Tech. After checking a lot of places, I found it was at the air cleaner. You see, on the road test, the customer thought the rattle was either clutch chatter, transmission noise, or a loose tailpipe. But back in the shop, Joe suggested I check the air cleaner. I thought he was kidding, but I tried rocking the cleaner by hand and found I could move it. When I tried to tighten the air cleaner clamp screw, however, I couldn't get it snug enough to keep the cleaner from moving. So I installed an extra gasket between the cleaner and carburetor.
What happened?
Well, Tech, one extra gasket wasn't enough. That particular job needed two.
And did that take care of the air cleaner noise, Mike?
On that car, yes. But on another job, I had a different noise, and gaskets wouldn't correct it. So instead of looking anywhere else, I took the air cleaner apart and inspected it carefully. Right inside the center of the oil reservoir, I found a broken weld. First time I ever saw one. But that's what made a kind of hollow snapping sound during slow speed acceleration. So I brazed the brake, and that licked the noise all right.
That reminds me, Mike. There's a type of air cleaner that might sound off occasionally with a dull rumble at 28 to 30 miles an hour. It only comes in on the air cleaner that has the oil baffle with 3 stamped legs. Those legs support the body containing the filter element. Now, at that 28 to 30 mile speed, the filter body sometimes dances on those legs, causing the dull, rumbling sound. To eliminate this noise, first remove the filter body, clamp it in a vise to hold the baffle tightly against the body. Then, drill a small hole through the underside of the leg and into the body. Insert a short self-tapping screw to fasten the baffle snugly against the body. After this, drill through the other legs and body and fasten them with self-tapping screws.
Good tip, Dave. Besides those air cleaner conditions, I ran into a special carburetor condition that took a little figuring.
Okay, Joe. Let's hear it.
Well, when this owner started his car from a standstill or accelerated in low speed, the car'd seem to start, then hesitate as if it weren't getting enough gas, and finally pick up okay. This faltering was noticed only during an early spring, before summer gasoline's available. The owner thought it was vapor lock in the carburetor, but I knew it'd go away when the oil company switched over to summer-grade gasoline. Meanwhile, I found it helped to change the accelerator pump link to the shortest stroke position.
Yeah, Joe. And there's a carburetor condition that causes uneven running at steady speeds anywhere between 18 and 40 miles an hour. But you get this condition only on a level road when the engine's fully warmed up. The car acts as if your foot is pumping the accelerator slightly, even though your foot is steady on the pedal. To overcome that condition, I make sure the engine's tuned up properly. You know the routine. Spark plugs cleaned and gapped, manifold stud nuts tight so there's no intake air leak, distributor breaker points clean and set, and valve tappet clearances adjusted right. But if these tune-up checks don't get rid of the uneven running, I remove the carburetor, take off the air horn, disconnect the accelerator pump link, and remove the throttle body from the main body. Then I use a special drill to enlarge the idle restriction about 2,000.
Better tell us what size drill that takes, Dave.
Yeah, Tech, you have to use a special drill known as a 1.45 millimeter drill. That's the same as a shade better than 57 thousandths. Anything bigger will ruin the carburetor. Remember, you've got to drill carefully by hand so the drill won't wobble in the hole. Then you blow out all the chips. If you cover all the tune-up bases plus the drilling, you'll smooth out performance in the 18 to 40 mile speed range.
Good tip, Dave. Got some more, my boys?
Well, Tech, the water pump shaft can make a noise once in a while, and it can be mistaken for a generator noise or some other noise up front. You see, when the engine's cold and running at a fast idle, the thermostat is closed. In this case, the water pump cannot circulate water through the radiator. Naturally, this puts a heavy load on the water pump impeller. This heavy load makes the shaft move endwise in the pump body. The movement sets up a noise if end play in the shaft is more than 5 thousandths. Usually, the noise may die down or go away when the thermostat opens, so the water is free to circulate through the radiator. So, I first give the water pump a shot of lubricant while it's noisy. If the noise goes away, I suspect too much end play in the shaft or worn bushings. In that case, I check for play in the water pump shaft. If I found too much play, I'd remove the water pump and pull the fan pulley hub off the shaft. Then I check to see if the rear face of the hub is smooth. If it isn't, you can't get uniform clearance between the hub and bushing to control end play properly. If the hub's okay, I remove the body cover plate and stand the pump on its impeller end. But when I do this, I put a metal washer under the impeller end. This raises the shaft so all end play is taken out. I then check the shaft for side play in its bushings. If there's noticeable side play, I recondition the pump. Now, to take out end play only, you turn the fan pulley hub 90 degrees from the hole in the shaft and press it back on the shaft. Allow from 1/2 to 5 thousandths clearance between the inner face of the hub and the front face of the front bushing.
And it's better if you hold that clearance to 3 thousandths.
When the hub is pressed on to give proper end play, use the special jig to drill a new hole for the pin.
Very good, Dave. But let me add this point. If you had rebuilt the pump, you'd find it smart to use the new Bellas-type water pump seal repair kit.
Good tip, fellas. But I cured a noise that ought to win me an orchid.
Well, Mike, you'd sure look swell with an orchid in your hair. But we'd rather hear what you found out.
Okay, Tech. This noise seemed to be coming from under the instrument panel, especially when the car was accelerating during slow speed. At first, it sounded like something loose in the engine compartment. But when I happened to flash a light into one side of the heater outlet, I noticed that the defroster valve was loose on its shaft. In fact, one screw was missing. So I removed the heater outlet, replaced the screw, and tightened all 3 screws until they were snug. Now, end play of the defroster valve shaft in the housing can cause about the same kind of noise, so you better check for end play. Just use your fingers and try to shake the valve endwise. If there's play, remove the defroster valve and pull out the shaft. Slide a heater damper control link spring over the shaft and up against the operating lever. Then reinstall the shaft and valve. That'll take care of end-play noise.
Pretty good, Mike. But I think that all of you fellas deserve credit for the handy service tips you figured out on these now-and-then jobs. What's more, you'll probably come up with additional ideas on other special conditions. So let's get together again real soon for another session on troubleshooting tips. And you fellas out there, have you got any special service tips you'd like to pass along to the rest of the gang? If you have, just write them down on the tech tip sheet we sent you with this film and mail them in. I'd be glad to hear from you.